Hey everybody, my name is Stephanie, and for my project I chose Panama, and this is me. So let's just jump right into it. Panama is located between Costa Rica and Colombia in Central America. It is about 600 miles north of the equator, which makes it not prone to hurricanes, and it currently has 3.6 million people. This is today's agenda. You can pause the video and read through it if you want. I'll talk about everything. The first thing I'm going to talk about, though, is the country context, and this is essential to understanding why things operate the way they do. So first is the government structure. The national government, obviously, is the biggest form of government. It has jurisdiction over everything, and it pretty much controls everything. From there, you have provinces, which are kind of like states, like Canada has provinces. And then from there, you have districts, which is like a weird combination of counties and cities. And the smallest form of government is a co-regiment, which is, think of like the boroughs of New York City or like a large neighborhood association. This is important to the implementation structure I will talk about in a minute. So there are two main cultures in Panama. You have the city and then you have the countryside. The city is obviously going to have all of the amenities, all of the services, the best infrastructure, and so on. The countryside, on the other hand, has very limited resources and I would say, rudimentary infrastructure. Very little electricity, very little plumbing. The roads are pretty much always going to be dirt. This is really important to everything that I'll talk about in a minute. So the history and rationale behind it all. Prior to 1982, there was no official disaster management system. It was just kind of like ad hoc, let's just figure out what we'll do when it happens. In 1982, they passed Ley 22, or Law 22, which established the National Civil Protection System. And this was kind of just like an abstract concept, nothing really concrete, and it kind of stayed like that until 2005, which is when they passed Law 7, which officially created CINEPROC, which I'll talk about in a second. And CINEPROC is a very concrete organization, and it's a little bit better. In 2002, though, backtracking a little bit, Panama officially joined CEPRENDNAC, which stands for the Coordination Center for Prevention of Natural Disasters in Central America. And essentially all of the countries in Central America got together and they were like, hey, let's talk about how we would all react as like one big unit if something happened. How would we share resources? How would we take care of each other? And so on. And then in 2005, Panama officially adopted the Hyogo framework, which I believe we've talked about a little bit. And that's essentially it serves as a model that the UN created in 2005. And it contains 5 priorities for action, and they pretty much made this framework, and they were like, any countries that want to get on board, feel free. And so Panama's like, yeah, totally, it sounds awesome. And this is a little bit more about CINEPROC, their National Emergency Management Organization. It's primarily a response agency. They do a little bit of prevention, but these are the kind of things that they do if you want to pause the video. So the implementation pattern is extremely top-down. As I was talking about earlier with the government structure, the more local the government, the less power they have. There are essentially no local agencies, so there are no local fire departments. They're always just an extension of the national government. Same with CINEPROC. There's no local agency, so CINEPROC manages everything. This is a quick overview of the hazard analysis. Again, you can pause the video if you want. I'm just going to talk quickly about the frequent ones. Flooding is a really big issue from excessive rain. About 2/3 of the year are the rainy season, and so the places like in the countryside are very prone because of their lack of infrastructure. Obviously mudslides happen as well because of that, and then earthquakes happen fairly frequently, but they're very rarely big, and they very rarely happen near any of the big cities. It's usually like in the mountains or in the ocean. So influence of past disasters. These are the big ones that I could find. A couple of big earthquakes have happened in the past, killing a few people. A big cholera outbreak happened in the early 90s. There was a very big drought in the early 80s that I don't think anybody died, but it affected a large chunk of the population. And then a really big volcano called Volcan Baru erupted in the 1500s, and it is currently described as potentially active, so it hasn't erupted in a while, but it could. These are the disaster management participants. I talked about CINEPROC and CEPRENDNAC a little bit. The Volunteer Corps is a part of CINEPROC. It's under CINEPROC, and it's just their National Volunteer Corps. They do pretty much a little bit everything. The National Firefighting Corps is their national firefighters, obviously. ETESA is, think of it like their National Weather Service. They kind of do all of the monitoring for weather, which includes storm tracking, precipitation, earthquakes, and even tsunamis. So they do a little bit of everything. The Red Cross does a lot of the humanitarian relief. They'll actually bring in stuff, so like food and water and stuff. That's kind of what they do. And then VOST, Panama, VOST is a virtual operations support team, and they basically look at social media during during disasters, and it's really important. They just recently, like last year, became part of CINEPROC, so they will be there if something happens to help, figure out what's going on social media. So I identified 5 potential obstacles that I think are really important to understand. First of all, there's a severe lack of mitigation planning in Panama. They mention it like twice in the laws, but I could not find anything on any actual mitigation projects or anything they're doing for mitigation. Number 2, communication advance warning. Again, going back to the countryside with very lack of infrastructure, communication, and advance warning are going to be really big issues. I don't know how they're supposed to find out if something happens. And then backtracking to mitigation, that's going to be the biggest issue in the countryside, obviously, because of the lack of infrastructure. So going back down, number 3, the top-down approach is going to be a really big issue. Even though the country is kind of small, starting from the top and going down, that could be a really big issue. CINEPROC is very inexperienced, which is the 4th obstacle. Only 10 years old, so we're not exactly sure how they're going to handle something when it happens. And obviously financial burdens. That's a big issue across the entire world, and because disaster management is very expensive. And I think, yep, that is it. So I am so sorry if I blew through that. We only had a few minutes. But let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.